This building is currently a church. But you would think that it was built originally as a Christian church for the Roman Catholic religion. But no, this goes way, way, way back, as most ancient ruins in Rome go back. This was built as the Temple of Venus by Hadrian. On the other side is the Temple of Rome. However, back in 44 BC, before this temple was as grand as it was during Hadrian's time, it was much smaller during 44 BC, a comet flew right over this very temple. This comet was a prophecy because it flew over for 7 consecutive days, lighting up the sky right as a funeral procession was happening. I'm Ariel with Urbanists, and today we are going to explore the Roman Forum, the mystery of the Vestal Virgins, and the prophecies of Rome. And then we're going to explore the man who almost beat Julius Caesar. He was paraded right on these very grounds. I'm Ariel with Urbanists, and this is Mysteries of the Eternal City. And we're going to explore this wonderful historical landmark right in front of the Colosseum. Let me know where you're watching from. '44 BC. A funeral procession is happening right here along the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum was a place for the elite of Rome to meet, to have discussions about political policies, and also to settle disputes. However, it was also a place of worship, a place where they would worship the gods Venus, Rome, and Vesta. '44 BC, Mark Antony, not the singer, the original Mark Antony, who was Julius's second-hand man, is saying a speech right in these grounds. It was made more iconic by Shakespeare's own words, so I'll use his words. He said, "Friends, countrymen, and Romans, lend me your ears. I'm not here to praise the man, I'm here to bury him." I'm paraphrasing Shakespeare. But the gist was that Mark Antony returned to Rome not to praise Julius Caesar. Because if he dared to praise Julius Caesar, he might lose his head. The Roman public liked Julius Caesar, but the Senate didn't. The Senate brutally murdered Caesar on the Ides of March 15th, 44 BC. So Mark Antony was playing it diplomatically. However, right as Mark Antony was saying those words and this massive funeral procession for the slain Julius Caesar went on, a huge comet flew right over. According to the Roman historian Suetonius, many years later, he claimed that this comet lit up the sky for 7 consecutive days. To the Roman people, this was a sign that Julius Caesar was way more than just a man. He was a god, a deity on earth. Julius Caesar during his life claimed to be a descendant of Venus. Those claims were bold because Julius Caesar was a bold man. But this gave another young man by the name of Octavian the weapon of propaganda to use in his favor. his own adopted uncle was a god because of this mysterious comet that flew right over Rome for 7 consecutive days. This comet is one of the most well-known comets seen in human history. No one knows exactly why it flew over the sky for 7 days, but it did change the course of history. Because after that, Augustus claimed Julius Caesar to be a god, and he himself, who went from Octavian to Augustus, became the son of a god. Many decades later, during his reign as the first emperor of Rome, he ended up becoming a god, living incarnate. However, the flames of Rome almost went out during Julius Caesar's rise to power, because that wasn't the only omen, good or bad, that the Romans believed in. They also believed in the fire of Vesta that burned nearby. Let's walk over there, and welcome to the Roman Forum. So here is the Temple of Vesta, attached to the Temple of Roma, built by Hadrian. Hadrian was very bold and combined 2 temples together back to back. As you know from episode 1 of Mysteries of the Eternal City, Hadrian loved his architecture. And the way he built these temples ended up changing architecture for Christianity forever. Because when Christianity became popular in the 3rd and 4th century, they continued on the legacy of Hadrian's architecture and built all the basilicas, the churches, in the same style. You see that style with churches all around the world, and even some churches in the Muslim world as well, because Constantine ruled over Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul. You can all thank Hadrian. Hello, Michelle. Hello, Grace. Hello, Natalia. Hello, Anna. Hello, Helena. Hello, Kathy. Hello, Kay. Hello, Lou. And hello, everyone. Let me know where you're watching from. And let me know what are you doing at this very moment. Right there is the Colosseum in full view. We visited that earlier today. If you want to learn about it, check out that episode. That's the previous episode of Mysteries of the Eternal City. Right there is the Ark of Constantine. Bonus 360 video coming on the history about that. But today we're going deeper into the Roman Forum. Now, what is the Roman Forum? Well, the Roman Forum is this area in Rome where all these governmental buildings were located. You can think of the Roman Forum similar to the Civic Center of New York City. That's where all the lawyers, senators, mayor, many other political officials all hang out in. Clerical workers, etc., etc., etc. Every major city has its own civic center, and usually they call the neighborhood after it being the civic center. So that was the Roman Forum 2,000 years ago. Jane, you're paying bills. That's funny. Well, I hope this cheers you up as you're doing so. So the Roman Forum is, in current day, it's basically a park of ruins. One of the largest collection of ruins in all of the world from Antiquity. This is the Ark of Titus. Titus, as we know, was another major emperor in later Romans history. And here we're approaching the beautiful vistas of the Roman Forum. And the Roman Forum was particularly built under 2 hills. The Capitoline Hill, which is right there, and Palatine Hill. Now, Palatine Hill was the home of most of the palaces for At first, the Roman senators, and then later on, the Roman emperors. Palatine has the same root as palace. And the word palace actually comes from Palatine Hill. The word capital, as in a capital city, or in the US, the Capitol building, comes from Capitoline Hill. Our world is way more shaped by ancient Rome than we actually even know. Now we're going to wiggle our way towards the Temple of Vesta. Hey, you're having a coffee with your Urbanist mug, Kay. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, that's awesome to hear. I'm glad. Thank you for taking that photo. Oh, wow. So here's one of the Basilica of Julia. Some more modern building. But this one looks, a few hundred years old, but that also 2,000 years old. Natalia, está lloviendo y aquí en la casa mirándote. Gracias por mirándome y qué buen momento para ver un poco de historia cuando está lloviendo. What a better time to see some history while it's raining outside. Oh, interesting, Lou. Lou, I'm glad you're watching a person who speaks Greek, because we owe a lot to the Romans, but the Romans owe a whole lot to the Greeks. So in essence, it all traces back to Greece. If we really want to go to the very root of most of these words that we use in modern day. So there's a huge amount of ruins here, about 15 distinct ruins. So you can easily spend a half a day here, especially if you know the history. But today we're going to focus first on the Temple of Venus. That's where we're starting, and we're heading out to the Temple of Vesta, and we're going to end at the Rostra, which is the place where the man who almost beat Julius Caesar met his final days. Lou, I'm so happy you're about to receive your mug. It should arrive shortly. So a lot of people here. This used to be open to the public, and since so many people were crowding the Roman Forum, it was very bad news for the actual ruins. Because, people would sometimes sneak over and start touching things. The floor itself, which parts of is original, would be utterly destroyed. So now you have to actually pay a ticket that is combined with the Colosseum and Palatine Hill all together to see this Roman Forum. I'm so glad so many people are tuning in. Welcome. If you're watching for the first time, I'm Ariel with Urbanist, and right now we're walking the Roman Forum. Be sure to watch the replay for the beginning of our story. And now we are approaching the Temple of Vesta and the House of Vesta as well. Oh, wow. Look at this huge. Wow. If you look at these buildings, they look just like the Supreme Court in the U.S. Countless civic buildings all around the U.S. and Western Europe. And I'm actually contemplating on doing Washington, D.C. next, because as I learn more about Rome, the similarities with Washington, D.C. are staggering, way more than I actually thought they were. So Washington, D.C. also had 7 hills, and it was originally called Rome, Maryland. But more on that after this Rome trip. Let's go to the Temple of Vesta. What is Vesta, and who were the Vestal Virgins? Because you might be exploring Rome, going to all these different sites, the Colosseum, various museums, and you might hear often the term Vestal Virgins. But people rarely ever explain what they are, because it's very interesting. Here in Rome, there's a very fascinating relationship with the Virgin Mary. And I think this fascinating relationship with the Virgin Mary, where there's countless Santa Maria's churches all around the city. On live videos, we visited at least 8, 9, 10, probably 10 around there at this point. I think traces all the way back to the Vestal Virgins. But for that, we have to go all the way back to the kings of Rome. Before the emperors, before the Republic, there were kings that ruled Rome. The first king that ever started the Temple of Vesta was King Numa. This was about 6th century BC, so way, way, way back. Almost 600 years before the age of Caesar. Good morning, Gretchen. That would be great because you were born in Washington. Oh, a lot of people are actually excited for Washington. That's awesome. So here we're approaching the Temple of Vesta. Let's see. Should be the House of Vesta. Right here. So bring good sturdy shoes. And here is the atrium of Vesta, the House of Vesta. So who lived here? Who started the Vestal Virgins? Well, King Numa worshipped a goddess called Vesta. And Vesta was depicted as a flame. And as long as that flame was lit up, it would mean that Rome would continue to thrive. But if the flame went out, Rome would disappear, crushed by its enemies. So Numa wanted to have the gods in his favor. So he built the very first Temple of Vesta and hired 2 Vestal Virgins. These were women that were made into Vestal Virgins between the ages of 6 and 10 years old, and they had to serve for 30 years. Within those 30 years, they had to be chaste, so they couldn't have any sexual relationships with anyone, nor could they marry either. Any type of romantic relationship was outlawed for these women. These women also had to tend to the fire of Vesta. So for 30 years, they had to make sure this flame was lit up. Because if the flame went out, Rome could die and forever disappear. So right here is where the Vestal Virgins used to live. And luckily they had a very short commute because they only had to walk about 200 feet over to the Temple of Vesta right next door.
Sie haben hier gelebt im Haus der Vestalen.
So this house was first established in 64 AD, the current ruins that we're seeing. So 2,000 years of history right here. Hey Danielis, you liked my Colosseum video. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Actually, let's see if we can walk. No, we can't walk this way, so let's go this way. By Caesar's time, the Vestal Virgins increased to 6. And that was the number they had. The very maximum number they had ever. 6 Vestal Virgins at any given time. 6 women that had to be chaste for 30 years, maintaining the fire. They also had various other duties. They would take care of wills and also make what was called the holy flour. It was flour used for ritual sacrifices done by the Roman Senate and then later the Roman emperors. However, the Vestal Virgins became a very big deal during the time of Augustus, because Augustus wanted to reignite these classic Roman traditions. Augustus saw himself as kind of a bringer of old Rome. So you can kind of think of Augustus as the current U.S. president or the current prime ministers that are popping up all around Europe. They promise a lot of bringing back the good values of the old country. And that was Augustus. So he brought a lot of these old practices back, including the Vestal Virgins. And this is the Temple of Vesta. Now, the Temple of Vesta was nearly completely destroyed by the 1500s because they quarried a lot of the columns and used them for various buildings around Rome. But by 1933, Benito Mussolini recovered those pieces and rebuilt the remnants of the Temple of Vesta. But what used to be a Temple of Vesta? It was a round building. And this round building would actually have a flame right in the middle, similar to the eternal flame that we saw underneath the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, France, or the eternal flame we saw in front of the Victor Emmanuel monument. However, this flame was way more important because unlike the eternal flame underneath the Arc de Triomphe that a man unfortunately pissed over it and put a kaput, that is no issue. You know, it's a disgrace, but it's not that big of a deal. Here it is. Because if a Vestal Virgin who was tasked with maintaining the flame that day let the flame go out, she might face severe punishment. So first off, Vestal Virgins had to be virgins. They were fully dressed in white, usually wearing a veil. When they would go to the Colosseum, they would have special seating, and people always wanted to get a glimpse of who were the Vestal Virgins. They were hired between the ages of 6 and 10 because it was believed that once you hit the age of 6, you most likely would live a long life, which pretty much was the case in all antiquity, because infant mortality rate was very low. You had way more chances of dying when you were infant, but after you passed the age of 6, you probably lived on for much longer. Also, the Vestal Virgins had to avoid any romantic relationships. If they were caught in a romantic relationship, the man who did something to the Vestal Virgin would be beaten to death, barefisted. However, with the Vestal Virgin, they couldn't be touched. They couldn't bleed whatsoever. So you couldn't draw blood from a Vestal Virgin. Otherwise, you would also be breaking the rules of the gods. So what would happen if a Vestal Virgin was caught having an affair? Well, one particular Vestal Virgin was caught having an affair with a man. She wasn't beaten or whipped as the man was. She was burned alive. Another woman many decades later during Julius Caesar's time also was caught having an affair. However, she was blamed for having an affair. No one knew if it was real because she mostly was responsible for the flame going out. Under her watch, the flame went away. this made the Roman Republic panic because they thought to themselves, oh my God, now we are in danger of being attacked and invaded. And this Vestal Virgin, as punishment, was locked into one of the rooms of the Temple of Vesta and left starving. However, after 30 years of service, if you survived and weren't starved or burned alive, you can live a normal life and you can marry. And it was a very top honor to be married to a Vestal Virgin. However, most Vestal Virgins took their oath of chastity very seriously, and most of them actually continued to be chaste for the rest of their lives. However, the flame almost went out on 52 BC. Because on 52 BC, Julius Caesar, while he was governor of Gaul, almost lost to a man who was uniting all the Gallic tribes together in defiance against this Roman invader. Now, when people come to the Roman Forum, and basically in just general history, everyone talks about Julius Caesar, because everyone talks about the winners. And while history is mostly written by the winners, but in this case, history was directly written by the winner, because Julius Caesar was really well kept with journals. He always wrote a bunch of journals and used them as propaganda for Rome that would be read aloud as like the news of the day. And he also wrote in the third person. But a lot of people don't talk about the losers. However, this particular person who lost was this close to defeating Julius Caesar. And he highlights something terrible that Julius Caesar did. Because Julius Caesar didn't merely conquer Gaul, he killed entire villages, wiping them entirely from the earth. Let's walk the very steps of the final days of Vercingetorix, the Gallic king. Hello, Liz. Aquí las 6:30 AM. Saludos de Tijuana. Gracias por mirarnos de Tijuana. Estoy emocionado de ir un día a México. Yo te he dicho eso. Yo he dicho eso varias veces, pero gracias por mirarnos. Thank you so much for watching from Tijuana. Wilma, what a nice walk from our storyteller. Great thing. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Marcel, welcome. Bernadette, looks like a beautiful day here today. It's been an amazing day. Amazing week in Rome. Every day has been wonderful weather. Except for last night, it was a thunderstorm. Otherwise, every other day has been amazing weather. And thanks for the food tips about the micro neighborhood near the Coliseum. I'll be going to Baker Boss for sure. Being a professional pastry chef, I love to check out bakeries everywhere I go. Awesome, Bernadette. By no means is that the best bakery. It's just a great bakery in very close proximity to the Coliseum. I'll be recommending 2 amazing bakeries soon. Truly exceptional bakeries. Stay tuned for photos on Facebook and Instagram. Actually, I'll be doing a Facebook Live of the pastries of Rome. So stay tuned for that. That's coming up later next week, or earlier next week. And Dithalbon, sorry if I mispronounced your name. I use DJI Osmo Mobile 3. Send me a message and I'll send you the link to the Amazon page of this device. And the Roman Forum is amazing. Check out where the place where apostles Peter and Paul were in prison. Oh yeah, we checked that out yesterday. So stay tuned. Check out the video from yesterday. And hello Annie, and hello Danny, hello Daniel. And we have, ¿podrás decir algo en español? Claro, Lisa, estamos ahora en el foro de Roma y aquí es donde dictador de Roma, Julio César, llevó el último rey de los Célticos por esta misma ruta. So here is where Julius Caesar took Vercingetorix, the Gallic king, on his final route towards his death. But who was Vercingetorix? What was he seeing as he walked these very stones? Well, Vercingetorix was a long-haired, bearded Gallic man, probably in his early 30s, who dared to rebel against the new governor of Gaul, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar yet still wasn't dictator. However, this was his move to become dictator. He was desperate after the death of Cassius over there in Parthia. He wanted to conquer lands quickly so he can get a heads up over Pompey. Thus, Julius Caesar went to conquer Gaul. Now, Gaul is a very interesting place. And Roy, you're watching me for the second time. Are you planning to visit the Appian Way Antica? I visited the Appian Wall yesterday. Appian Way, I'm not entirely sure yet. I gotta see where it is. But I do want to go. I want to talk about the early cult of Roman Catholicism. Only cult of Christianity. At that time, it was a cult. Gaul. Think about Christopher Columbus. Actually, not Christopher Columbus. Yesterday was Columbus Day. But let's think about another Spanish conquistador. Think about the Spanish conquistador who first landed in modern-day Mexico City. You sail halfway across the world, and when Christopher Columbus sailed just about 2 decades earlier, he came across Native American tribes. At that time, the Taino people. I talked about the Taino people when I was in Puerto Rico. The Taino people mostly lived in huts and in smaller, kind of more confided places. They were in tiny villages. They fished mostly. By all means, they were a very kind of much more primitive group of people in terms of technology. But the conquistador that landed first onto modern-day Mexico City, and then the other conquistador that landed into modern-day Cusco in Peru, wasn't greeted by tiny villages of a bunch of huts, of fishermen, of people who worship mountain gods. No, they were greeted by the Aztecs and the Incas, people with massive, huge buildings, pyramids, on a scale that the world hasn't seen since ancient Egypt. They were greeted by people with very advanced technology in a very different way. The Incas had roped armor that wasn't found anywhere in Europe. Very durable. It was almost like ancient Kevlar. So put yourself in the shoes of that conquistador, thinking, oh, you're going to come across a few huts and a few fishermen. Oh no, that must have been a terrifying sight. Because suddenly you were greeted with a culture that was very different and very large. In perspective, the Incas numbered well above 1 million in modern-day area of Cusco and Lima. 1 million people, the same size as Rome. However, for the conquistadors, they were lucky, because when they returned about 15 years later, they were lucky for them, but the Native Americans were very unlucky because they were decimated by disease, smallpox. However, the same thing happened to Julius Caesar and the Romans who ventured up north into Europe. Because the people who lived in southern France, a lot of them were in huts, a lot of them were in small villages. But the further up north you got, the more you realize how very populous Gaul was. But unlike South America and the conquest by the Spanish conquistadors, they didn't have it easy. Because Julius Caesar didn't have a major disease that wiped out the Gauls. He had millions of people still alive in different deep parts of forests and mountains and hilltops and valleys, in terrains that Julius Caesar had no clue about. That was the experience of Julius Caesar going up to Gaul, a country that was super populated by millions of people. Not a few thousand, millions. So what is Julius Caesar to do when he's up there with millions of people that were never used to being part of what he used to call civilization? Because civilization was major cities, a city like Rome, here 1 million people living in one single place. However, there was not any major cities in ancient Gaul. They were all used to living in their own villages, but they were extremely numerous. They were used to having wars with outsiders, but not so organized by one single charismatic leader. Julius Caesar had a challenge on his hands because he couldn't subjugate these people quickly. There wasn't one king to defeat, nor one general to defeat. There were hundreds, thousands of generals to defeat. So Julius Caesar's main tactic was utter decimation, utter destruction of Gaul. He went into Gaul and killed everyone. By all estimates, people say that he killed up to 70 million people, so anywhere between 7 million and 70 million people. It's a wide gap. No one knows exactly what is the number because there was a whole lot of people in that region and there was no proper census. And those people didn't live in major cities, unlike in Rome, where you can calculate the amount of people who lived there. But you can imagine Caesar committed a Holocaust of up to more than 7 million people in Gaul. This terrified the Gallic tribes because here was a man who had zero mercy. Here was a man who was completely destroying the Celtic people, erasing them from the earth, because for him it was much easier to do that than to try to subjugate them. They were too numerous and too sparse in the land. The Gallic tribes had to fight back. And thus came a man called Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix was a charismatic leader, again in his early 30s, who decided to start uniting the various Gallic tribes under one banner. Because Julius Caesar just named himself governor of Gaul after killing millions of Celtic people. The Celts had to do something to fight back. And Vercingetorix offered a solution. Not to attack the Romans directly, but to attack their camps, to attack their supply lines, to attack any tribe that allied with the Romans. And slowly but surely, Vercingetorix conquered each and every single supply line. However, Julius Caesar had none of it. He left Rome, went back to Gaul to take care of this revolution. And thus, the Celts, the Gallics, led by Vercingetorix, had the high ground in the hill of Alesia, which is modern-day Alesia. And he went up to Alesia, and they had the high ground. So by all means, in ancient battle, if you had the high ground, you were going to win, especially if it's your own territory, filled with a bunch of mountains and forests. What did Julius Caesar do? Well, Vercingetorix was on this hill, and he was feeling pretty sure of himself. He already debilitated most of the Roman army. If he won this very battle of Alesia, he would reign victorious. Julius Caesar would be dead, and the course of history would have been changed forever, because Pompey was already weakened by that point. Another civil war would have happened, and Rome would not have been as strong as it is now, or end up being. Julius Caesar went up to the hill. However, instead of attacking the hill directly on, because otherwise that would have been a suicide mission, Julius Caesar had a very notorious plan. That plan was to build a wall around the hill. Now, this was unprecedented, because while most armies build a wall to protect themselves, Julius Caesar built a wall to trap them in. So you could just imagine Alesia being Palatine Hill right over here, and a wall being built around Palatine Hill. You would think that if you're on top of the hill, you have it good because you can see the entire land. But no, the wall is stopping you from coming out and getting supply of food and water. Caesar trapped them in. But then Caesar encroached beyond the wall and built another wall, an inner barrier. Vercingetorix had two walls to contend with. And then Caesar started laying siege upon Alesia Hill in France. For 5 whole months, the Vercingetorix and his army were left starving and dying. Vercingetorix decided to surrender. He came this close to defeating Caesar, but Caesar is, for very good reason, known as one of the smartest military strategists of all history because of this very battle plan. To build a wall not to keep the enemies out, but to keep them in. That's what made Julius Caesar the inspiration for countless subsequent world leaders. Napoleon, George Washington, Benito Mussolini, Hitler. Now, all those men are not the same. They all have they're all different in their own respects. But at some point they had great control over massive armies, and they used Julius Caesar's very plans from the Battle of Alesia to win their own battles. So what happened to Vercingetorix? Well, Vercingetorix came over here, and by 42 BC, he was walking this very pathway in chains. However, Vercingetorix did not resist. He was defeated. And who could blame him? There was millions of his own kin were slaughtered, of his own people. His culture was being decimated. Earlier today, we talked about damnatio memoriae, which is the practice by the Romans to erase everything from the history books. Every mention of that person's name, every mention of that person's image would be erased from every wall, every book, every painting, every sign. The Romans committed damnatio memoriae on the Celts. And Vercingetorix knew that. For the rest of history, almost no one knows much about the Celts. They were a very numerous culture, millions of people all around Europe. Celts were found all the way to the deserts of China. And yet, we don't know much about them. Mostly because of Caesar's Holocaust against the Celts. His utter decimation of these people that lived just north of the wall of Rome. And Vercingetorix walked right in these very lines. He walked right over here, made his way down, 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 up through here as people are cheering, jeering, yelling obscenities, walking up these very hills. Julius Caesar in full military regalia, wearing the crown of laurels. The entire world watching because Julius Caesar just made a stand. He was victorious. He just conquered one of the largest enemies of all of Rome. It's like the U.S. in 1989 when the Soviet Union collapsed. It was a massive cause for celebration. That was Julius Caesar with Gaul, except much to a much larger degree because the Soviet Union, the people were still there. In Gaul, 90% of the people were slaughtered. And right down here at the rostra, Vercingetorix met his final stop, having to kneel and kiss the very feet of the man who completely slaughtered his entire culture. Right here at these very grounds. This is where the great hero of the Celts met his end, just only a few short days later in the prison nearby, strangled to death. Not an honorable killing, not an honorable execution by no means. Vercingetorix surrendered, thinking he would be met with an honorable execution, killed by the sword in front of the people of Rome. But no, he was left in chains, kissing the feet of the man who damned all of his people, and then strangled to death in a dark cell of no one to see. So it makes me think, because the more you read about history, the more it makes sense when people have certain fates. It's rare you have a good leader that is pretty innocent to die a horrible death. We already learned about Trajan, Vespasian, Hadrian. They all died relatively peaceful. None of them committed mass atrocities. None of them saw themselves as God. Vespasian even made fun of the concept of being a god. His final words being, I think I'm becoming a god. He was saying that as a joke, because he knew it was a joke. Because he knew if he took it seriously, he too would meet the same fate as Julius Caesar. So I don't think it's a coincidence that Julius Caesar was utterly slaughtered in his own forum, killed by so many senators all around him. What he did to the Celts isn't forgivable. And even though he was deified because of this great comet that flew over the skies during his funeral procession, he laid a path for an empire that would commit far larger atrocities in its future, conquering land after land. So maybe the fire almost went out that day in 52 BC as Vercingetorix was on that hill. But nonetheless, it kept alit, lighting up the way, just like the comet did 10 years later for the Roman Empire. I'm Ariel with Urbanist. Thank you everyone so much for watching. If you want to become a supporter and get access to extra 360 videos, you can do so by clicking the Become a Supporter link in the description below or the button right down there. If you enjoyed this story, press that heart button. And a final moment of silence for Vercingetorix and the death of a culture. One more time, the Roman Forum. And hello, Jackie, I'm here. Okay, everyone. Keep being awesome. And always keep on exploring. From the goodness of your heart, there's no need to be like these Roman empires and destroy the memories of other people, of other cultures. It's important to keep the memories alive. It's important to treat everyone with the respect and mutual admiration. Because even though we might encounter people in our lives that are shitty to us, that are frankly disloyal or aloof or uncaring to us, that doesn't give us permission to erase them. That doesn't give us permission to give them full-on retribution. Because if you do, well, you can learn from the example of the Roman emperors. Because they got the full retribution in return. Nothing in this life is unreciprocated. Nothing. I'm Ariel with Urbanus. Keep being awesome and always keep on exploring. Arrivederci, amici. Ciao, amici.